Before your thoughts wander anywhere else, linger here for a moment, because something quiet, something deeply human, has been unfolding beyond your awareness. Not in a dramatic place. Not beneath flashing signs or grand declarations. It happened in a conversation so ordinary that almost no one involved realized it would become a turning point. And yet, what was spoken there carried your name in a way you never expected. Don't skip. Because this story does not begin with a confession. It does not begin with a message. It does not even begin with your soulmate. It begins with someone else speaking about you. A casual remark. A passing opinion. A few words released into the air without much thought. And for a brief second, nobody challenged it. The room continued breathing. The conversation moved forward. The world appeared unchanged. But then something happened. Someone who had been unusually quiet suddenly lifted their head. Someone who had spent far too long pretending not to care. Someone who had convinced themselves they were finished carrying certain feelings. Your soulmate. What happened next was not planned. There was no preparation. No carefully crafted speech. No dramatic declaration. Just a moment. A single moment where the heart moved faster than the mind. And sometimes those are the moments that reveal the truth. You see, people often imagine that love announces itself loudly. But real feelings rarely arrive that way. More often, they reveal themselves through protection. Through unexpected loyalty. Through the instinct to defend someone when there is nothing to gain. And that is exactly what happened. While others continued speaking, your soulmate felt something stir within them. Not anger. Not frustration. Something much deeper. Because hearing someone misunderstand you awakened a realization they had been trying to ignore. A realization that had quietly followed them through days and nights. A realization they never intended to admit. They still cared. Perhaps more than they wanted to. Perhaps more than they were ready to. And suddenly remaining silent became impossible. So they spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But firmly. The kind of firmness that surprises everyone in the room. Including the person speaking. And as those words left their lips, something shifted. The atmosphere changed. The conversation paused. People listened. Because when someone speaks from genuine conviction, others can feel it. Even when they cannot explain why. Your soulmate did not defend an image of you. They defended something much more meaningful. Your character. Your intentions. The parts of you most people never take time to understand. The parts they had quietly observed. The parts they remembered. The parts that had remained with them long after they claimed they had moved on. And in that moment, they realized something unsettling. Nobody speaks with that much certainty about someone they no longer think about. That realization landed heavily. Far heavier than anyone else could see. Stay till the end. Because this is where the story becomes unexpectedly emotional. After the conversation ended, life continued as usual. People returned to their routines. Messages were sent. Doors opened and closed. The day moved forward. But your soulmate carried something away from that moment. A question. One they could not easily answer. Why had they reacted so strongly? Why had your name still held that kind of power? Why had defending you felt so natural? The question followed them. Through distractions. Through responsibilities. Through conversations with other people. It remained there. Quiet. Persistent. Waiting. And every time they tried pushing it aside, another memory surfaced. Not the dramatic memories. Not the extraordinary ones. The small ones. The moments people usually forget. A certain conversation. A certain laugh. A certain look. A certain feeling. Tiny fragments. Yet somehow those fragments carried more weight than entire chapters of their life. Have you ever noticed how the heart works that way? It does not always preserve the biggest moments. Sometimes it carefully protects the simplest ones. And your soulmate was beginning to understand that. Not because they wanted to. Because they could no longer avoid it. Days passed. Then more days. And still the memory of defending you remained vivid. Almost strangely vivid. As if their own heart was trying to draw attention to it. As if something inside them was saying, "Look carefully. This mattered." But they resisted. Of course they did. People often resist the truths that matter most. Not because those truths are painful. Because they are powerful. Powerful truths ask us to change. Powerful truths ask us to be honest. And honesty can feel terrifying when it threatens the story we've been telling ourselves. Your soulmate had been telling themselves a story. A story that said certain feelings were over. A story that said certain chapters had closed. A story that said your influence had faded. Yet their actions had revealed something entirely different. And actions have a way of exposing what words cannot hide. Then one evening something happened. Not outwardly. Not visibly. Internally. A realization arrived. Softly. Like a whisper rather than a shout. And it changed everything. They understood that defending you had not been about winning an argument. It had not been about proving a point. It had been instinct. Pure instinct. The instinct to protect someone whose importance never truly disappeared. And the moment they understood that, their heart broke a little. Not from sadness. Not from regret. From recognition. Because they finally saw how deeply they still carried you. Something important is waiting for you. Because this realization did not bring immediate clarity. It brought vulnerability. The kind that cannot be hidden from yourself. The kind that asks difficult questions. Questions like, why do I still remember them? Why do I still notice things that remind me of them? Why does their happiness still matter to me? Why did hearing someone misunderstand them feel personal? And perhaps the hardest question of all. What does this mean? Your soulmate sat with those questions longer than anyone knows. Longer than they expected. Longer than they wanted. Because every answer seemed to lead back to the same place. Back to you. Back to memories. Back to feelings they thought had faded. Back to possibilities they had stopped allowing themselves to imagine. And somewhere deep inside, another realization was beginning to form. One even more significant than the first. But that realization had not fully surfaced yet. Not completely. Not clearly. It remained just beyond reach. Like a distant light appearing through fog. Visible enough to notice. Not visible enough to understand. And that is where this chapter pauses. Not with certainty. Not with conclusions. But with a heart that has finally stopped pretending. A heart that defended you when nobody expected it. A heart that revealed its truth before the mind could intervene. A heart now standing face to face with feelings it can no longer deny. Because what happened after that realization? What they discovered when they finally stopped running from those emotions. And the unexpected choice they made next is only beginning to unfold. There was a strange silence after that realization. Not the silence of emptiness. The silence that follows a truth finally being acknowledged. The kind of silence that changes the way a person sees everything around them. Your soulmate carried that silence with them everywhere. It followed them through crowded places. It sat beside them during ordinary routines. It appeared unexpectedly during moments when they believed they were finally distracted. And the more they tried to move forward, the more one detail refused to leave them alone. The memory of defending you. At first, they told themselves it meant nothing. People defend others all the time. People speak up during conversations every day. There was nothing unusual about it. At least that is what they tried to believe. But the heart has a curious habit. It keeps returning to moments that matter. Again. And again. And again. Not because it enjoys living in the past. Because it recognizes something the mind has not fully accepted. And every time your soulmate replayed that conversation, new details appeared. The expression on someone's face when your name was mentioned. The feeling in their chest when they chose to speak. The certainty they felt while defending you. None of it seemed accidental anymore. Each memory felt connected to something larger. Something they had been overlooking. Then one evening, while everything around them seemed completely ordinary, an unexpected thought crossed their mind. What if I know them better than I admitted to myself? The question arrived quietly. Yet it changed everything. Because once that question appeared, countless others followed. What if my feelings never disappeared? What if I simply buried them beneath responsibilities, distractions, and time? What if the reason I reacted so strongly was because part of me still sees them differently than everyone else does? Suddenly, the answers they had avoided began finding them. Not all at once. Little by little. Like pieces of a puzzle slowly returning to their proper places. And with every piece that returned, something became impossible to ignore. You occupied a space in their heart that nobody else had managed to replace. That realization was beautiful. But it was also painful. Not because love is painful. Because honesty can be. Especially when honesty arrives later than expected. For a long time, your soulmate had convinced themselves they were protecting their heart. They believed distance would create clarity. They believed enough time would erase certain emotions. They believed moving forward meant leaving certain feelings behind. Yet here they were. Still remembering. Still caring. Still defending. Still wondering. And the more they thought about it, the more they realized something remarkable. Their strongest memories of you were not connected to grand events. They were connected to who you are. The way you made people feel understood. The way you carried kindness without demanding recognition. The way you continued moving forward even during difficult seasons. The way you remained yourself when pretending would have been easier. Those were the things they remembered. Those were the things they defended. And those were the things that made their heart ache. Because suddenly they understood what had truly broken them that day. It wasn't hearing someone speak incorrectly about you. It was realizing how much your reputation mattered to them. How much your character mattered to them. How much you mattered. Don't skip. Because the next realization arrived when they least expected it. A few days later, another conversation happened. This one had nothing to do with you. Or so it seemed. People were discussing relationships. Connections. The kinds of people who leave lasting impressions. Everyone shared opinions. Everyone offered stories. Everyone moved through the discussion casually. Then someone asked a simple question. A harmless question. The kind people answer without thinking. If you could describe someone who genuinely changed your perspective on life, who would it be? The room continued talking. Names were mentioned. Stories were shared. Laughter filled the air. But your soulmate became unusually quiet. Because before they could stop it, your face appeared in their mind. Not intentionally. Not deliberately. Instantly. Naturally. Like their heart had answered before their thoughts had a chance to participate. And that frightened them. Not because it felt wrong. Because it felt true. There is a difference. A very important difference. Wrong feelings create confusion. True feelings create recognition. And recognition can be overwhelming. Especially when it arrives after you've spent so much time convincing yourself otherwise. That night became difficult to ignore. Not dramatic. Not emotional in an obvious way. Just deeply reflective. They found themselves revisiting moments they had not thought about in a long time. Moments they once considered insignificant. Yet now each memory carried a new meaning. Each memory seemed to whisper the same thing. You never stopped caring. The words were never spoken aloud. But they echoed all the same. And for the first time, your soulmate stopped arguing with them. Stopped resisting. Stopped creating explanations. Stopped pretending. They simply listened. And what they heard changed something inside them forever. Because they finally understood that defending you had not been the beginning of these feelings. It had been evidence of feelings that already existed. Feelings quietly waiting beneath the surface. Feelings patient enough to survive silence. Patient enough to survive distance. Patient enough to survive uncertainty. And once that realization settled into their heart, another question emerged. A question far more personal than any before. What if they still think about me too? That question lingered. Not as a fantasy. Not as an expectation. As a possibility. A possibility they had never allowed themselves to explore. And the moment they considered it, everything felt different. The future looked different. The memories looked different. Even the present moment looked different. Because hope had quietly entered the room. Not loud hope. Not reckless hope. The gentle kind. The kind that arrives after honesty. The kind that appears when a person finally stops running from their feelings. But hope can be fragile. And before your soulmate could fully embrace it, something unexpected happened. A discovery. A detail. A moment so surprising that it forced them to question everything they thought they understood about your connection. And when that moment arrived, their heart wasn't prepared for what it revealed. Some discoveries do not arrive with noise. They do not announce themselves. They do not demand attention. They simply appear at the exact moment a person is finally ready to see them. That is what happened next. Your soulmate was not searching for answers. In fact, they had reached a point where they believed they understood enough. They knew they still cared. They knew your name still carried weight inside their heart. They knew the feelings they had tried to dismiss were real. And for a brief moment, they thought that realization was the end of the story. But life rarely reveals everything at once. Sometimes it opens one door only to show another waiting behind it. And the door that opened next was one they never expected. It happened during an ordinary day. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. The kind of day most people forget. Yet those are often the days that leave the deepest marks. Because while moving through familiar routines, they encountered something connected to you. Not a direct message. Not a conversation. Not even a deliberate reminder. Just a small detail. Something simple. Something that would have meant very little to anyone else. Yet the moment they saw it, time seemed to slow. A memory surfaced immediately. Then another. Then another. And suddenly they found themselves smiling. Not because they planned to. Because the memory arrived carrying warmth. The kind of warmth that cannot be forced. The kind that appears when someone has touched your life more deeply than you realized. For several seconds, they simply stood there. Thinking. Remembering. Feeling. And that was when the discovery happened. Not outside of them. Inside of them. A realization so clear it almost took their breath away. Every memory they carried of you had survived. Not just survived. Remained meaningful. That was the part they could no longer ignore. You were not merely someone they remembered. You were someone whose impact was still active. Still present. Still shaping the way they saw certain things. Still influencing emotions they thought had faded long ago. And once they recognized that truth, something unexpected happened. The walls they had built around their feelings began to weaken. Not collapse. Not disappear. Just soften. Enough for honesty to enter. Enough for vulnerability to speak. Enough for a deeper truth to emerge. Because there is a difference between missing someone and understanding their value. For a long time, your soulmate believed they were experiencing the first. Now they were beginning to understand the second. Stay till the end. Because this realization carried a question that changed everything. If someone still occupies this much space in my heart, why have I been acting as though they don't? The question followed them for days. And unlike previous questions, this one refused to leave. Every answer led back to the same place. Back to you. Back to the connection. Back to the feelings they had tried to organize into neat little boxes. Feelings that no longer fit inside those boxes. Because real emotions rarely stay where we place them. They grow. They evolve. They wait patiently until we are ready to acknowledge them. And your soulmate was reaching that point. Slowly. Carefully. Honestly. Then another unexpected moment arrived. A conversation with someone they trusted. Nothing planned. Nothing intentional. The discussion wandered through life, relationships, personal growth, and the people who leave permanent marks on our hearts. The conversation flowed naturally. Until a single sentence stopped them completely. The other person said, "Sometimes the people who matter most are the ones we spend the longest time trying not to think about." The words lasted only a few seconds. Yet their impact lingered much longer. Because your soulmate immediately recognized themselves in that statement. They thought about all the times they had distracted themselves. All the times they had redirected their attention. All the times they had convinced themselves they were completely fine. And suddenly a surprising truth became impossible to deny. The effort required to stop thinking about someone often reveals how much they matter. That realization struck deeply. Far deeper than they expected. Because for the first time, they saw the full picture. Not isolated moments. Not random memories. The entire pattern. The defense. The memories. The questions. The reflections. The emotions. The quiet loyalty. The lingering affection. The inability to completely let go. Every piece belonged to the same story. A story they had been reading one page at a time without realizing it. And now the meaning was becoming clear. Don't skip. Because this was also the moment their heart experienced something unexpected. Relief. Not certainty. Relief. The relief that comes when pretending finally ends. The relief that comes when someone stops fighting their own feelings. The relief that comes when truth no longer feels like an enemy. And with that relief came something else. Curiosity. A gentle curiosity about what might still be possible. Not because they expected anything. Not because they demanded answers. Because their heart had finally become open again. Open to possibilities. Open to understanding. Open to conversations they once avoided. Open to emotions they once feared acknowledging. And as that openness grew, something extraordinary began happening. The image they carried of you became clearer. Not idealized. Not exaggerated. Real. They remembered your strengths. Your imperfections. Your kindness. Your resilience. Your humanity. And strangely enough, seeing the complete picture made their feelings stronger, not weaker. Because genuine affection does not grow from perfection. It grows from authenticity. From knowing someone as they truly are. And appreciating them anyway. That realization touched something profound within them. Something they had been unable to access before. Something that made their heart feel both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because they were finally being honest. Heavier because honesty carries responsibility. Responsibility to acknowledge what is real. Responsibility to stop hiding from meaningful emotions. Responsibility to consider what comes next. And that final responsibility was the one they could no longer avoid. Because a decision was beginning to form. Not a rushed decision. Not an emotional impulse. A thoughtful one. A sincere one. A decision connected to something they had not allowed themselves to imagine for a very long time. The possibility of reaching toward the connection instead of away from it. The possibility of understanding rather than assuming. The possibility of allowing the story to continue instead of closing it prematurely. But before they could take even a single step toward that possibility, one final realization arrived. A realization so personal. So unexpected. So deeply connected to everything that had happened before. That it left them completely speechless. And the moment that realization surfaced, they understood why defending you had never truly been about protecting your reputation. It had always been about protecting a place in their heart they never stopped carrying. The moment that realization settled into their heart, everything became unusually quiet. Not around them. Within them. For so long, they had been searching for explanations. Trying to understand why your name continued appearing in their thoughts. Trying to understand why memories refused to fade. trying to understand why even the smallest reminder of you seemed capable of changing the atmosphere of an entire day. Now they finally knew. And strangely enough, the answer was much simpler than they expected. You mattered. Not because of one conversation. Not because of one memory. Not because of one unfinished chapter. You mattered because your presence had become woven into a part of their life they never fully left behind. And once that truth revealed itself, another truth quietly followed. The heart does not protect what is meaningless. It protects what it treasures. That realization stayed with them. Morning after morning. Night after night. And the more they reflected on it, the harder it became to continue pretending that your connection had been ordinary. Because ordinary connections fade naturally. They drift away without resistance. Without reflection. Without lingering emotion. Yet here they were. Still thinking. Still remembering. Still carrying pieces of a story they believed had ended long ago. And perhaps the most surprising part of all was this. They were no longer trying to escape those feelings. For the first time, they were allowing themselves to sit with them. To understand them. To listen. And what they heard was something they had overlooked for a very long time. Every memory of you carried the same emotion beneath it. Respect. Not fascination. Not obsession. Respect. A deep appreciation for who you are. For the way you move through life. For the strength you showed during moments others never fully understood. For the kindness you offered when nobody was watching. For the quiet courage hidden behind your ordinary days. The more they reflected, the clearer it became. Their heart had never simply remembered you. Their heart had admired you. And that realization touched them more deeply than they expected. Because admiration is different. It survives distance. It survives silence. It survives time. Don't skip. Because this is where everything begins to change. One evening, while sitting alone with their thoughts, your soulmate found themselves asking a question they had avoided for far too long. What would happen if I stopped assuming? The question seemed simple. Yet it carried enormous weight. Because assumptions had guided so much of their journey. Assumptions about what you felt. Assumptions about what was possible. Assumptions about what could never happen. Assumptions about chapters they believed were already closed. But what if those assumptions were incomplete? What if they had been protecting themselves from uncertainty rather than seeking the truth? The thought lingered. And once it appeared, it refused to leave. Because every meaningful connection eventually arrives at this crossroads. A person can continue living inside assumptions. Or they can become curious enough to seek understanding. Your soulmate was beginning to choose curiosity. Not recklessly. Not impulsively. Carefully. Genuinely. And curiosity has a remarkable effect on the heart. It transforms fear into possibility. It transforms hesitation into reflection. It transforms endings into questions. Questions that invite new chapters. As these thoughts continued unfolding, something unexpected happened. Your soulmate began noticing you everywhere. Not literally. But symbolically. A song carrying a familiar feeling. A phrase that reminded them of an old conversation. A place connected to a memory. A small detail that seemed insignificant to everyone else. Yet each one stirred something inside them. Not because life was trying to send a message. Because their awareness had changed. When someone matters deeply, the heart naturally notices reminders connected to them. And now those reminders felt impossible to ignore. Each one seemed to whisper the same thing. There is more here than you admitted. There is more here than you understood. There is more here than you allowed yourself to explore. And little by little, they stopped arguing with that truth. Stay till the end. Because the next realization arrived when they least expected it. While reflecting on everything that had happened, they began examining the conversation where they defended you. Not the words. The feeling. The feeling behind the words. Why had speaking up felt so important? Why had remaining silent felt impossible? Why had that moment stayed alive in their memory long after everything else faded? Then suddenly they understood. It wasn't because someone misunderstood you. It was because they couldn't bear the thought of your value being overlooked. That was the part that touched them. That was the part that stayed. Because somewhere deep inside, they believed you deserved to be seen accurately. To be understood fairly. To be appreciated fully. And that realization revealed something beautiful. Their heart wasn't holding onto an illusion. Their heart was holding onto appreciation. A sincere appreciation for the person they knew you to be. And once they recognized that, something shifted forever. The uncertainty that once surrounded their feelings began dissolving. Not completely. But enough. Enough for clarity to enter. Enough for honesty to grow. Enough for a decision to begin taking shape. A decision they never imagined themselves considering. The possibility of reconnecting with what they had spent so long avoiding. The possibility of exploring what remained unfinished. The possibility of discovering whether the connection still carried life within it. Yet even as that possibility emerged, another emotion appeared alongside it. Vulnerability. Because every meaningful step forward requires vulnerability. Every meaningful connection asks us to risk being seen. To risk being understood. To risk hearing an answer we cannot control. And your soulmate knew that. Which is why they moved slowly. Thoughtfully. Carefully. But despite their caution, something inside them continued growing stronger. Not urgency. Conviction. The quiet conviction that some connections deserve understanding instead of assumptions. The quiet conviction that certain people leave lasting marks for a reason. The quiet conviction that unfinished feelings rarely disappear simply because we ignore them. And as that conviction grew, one final piece of the puzzle began sliding into place. A realization connected not to the past, but to the future. A realization that would soon force them to make a choice. Not between remembering and forgetting. That choice had already been made. The real choice waiting ahead was far more significant. Would they continue carrying these feelings silently? Or would they finally allow the truth inside their heart to move beyond thought and become action? And when that question fully arrived, everything changed.